really by assessing, I mean building a roadmap for all of us. So we have got stakeholders here together in the room, which is a very big step and a very big initiative to start discussing this flooding issue in Mumbai, which has been persistent, but which is also changing a lot and very quickly. We have a very comprehensive 2-day workshop lined up. And we have several sectors coming together, which is really the highlight of this workshop. And this is not supposed to be a conference really, but this is more supposed to be a discussion session, so to say, between the various sectors we have with us for these 2 days. So we have 3 panels today and 3 panels tomorrow. And the way we have kind of set up this workshop is we have a technical panel in the beginning, as you must have seen on the agenda. A panel especially on the social science aspect of it and vulnerability. And then interventions in the context of Mumbai. What really can work? What are the barriers? And on the second day, we would hear about, in detail, we would hear about the government initiatives, particularly towards addressing flood risk in Mumbai towards the beginning of the day. We'll hear from some citizens who were impacted by flooding and their experiential, it's more of an experiential session. So we can, when we look at flooding, flood models, we look at hydrology, we always think in terms of technical terms. But here we want to also humanize the experience and actually see on ground what happens and from there feed our strategy. And in the end, towards the end, we have a special session by C40 cities, and they will talk about financing mechanisms for these solutions. So it's a pretty jam-packed schedule, but we hope to have very interesting discussions. And the way we are going to do this really is we hope to have participation from all of the audience. And we are fortunate to have participants from BMC's several departments here to hear from us, to share with us. So it's a unique setup. Let's make full use of this in a constructive dialogue. And yeah, I mean, if you have any questions, please reach out to one of us at WRI. With this, I would like to begin an overview presentation, and I would like to invite Lubena to begin.
Hello everyone, thank you again for joining us this morning. I'm Lubaina Rangwala, the Program Head for Urban Development at WRI India. And I'm just going to show some slides to just orient us. A lot of it builds on what Velasu sir has already presented as a very good foundation for us to now build on through lots of multilateral conversations that we can have. To give you all context, a lot of the ways in which we are imagining the urban flooding work is also rooted from some of the analysis and thinking around the Mumbai Climate Action Plan. It is the 6th sector that we are focusing on. But in the context of urban flooding, we are also touching on various associated issues of water resource management. So it intersects with water supply, it intersects with sanitation, probably in many ways also with solid waste management in many bottlenecks as we kind of begin to think and understand the overall kind of context of the challenges that we are facing. And so in the MCAP, we committed to essentially 6 broad actions which range from building flood resilient infrastructure and systems to the range of participatory and disaster preparedness methods and protocol that need to take place, really engaging local communities, understanding their needs, and understanding how floods are impacting in various neighborhoods and hearing from citizens as well. So this is basically the kind of overall thinking of our workshop today. This again builds on what Sir was presenting. I mean, this is a really old map of Mumbai that talks that shows a stage after the Seven Islands map that Sir showed, and with a lot of reclamation and urbanization, we are essentially somewhere here today. We've actually built up a lot more than even this image as it stands, and this is the flood hotspot. So as I was saying, these are broadly the 24 actions that we had committed to in the Mumbai Climate Action Plan, out of which the 6th sector looks at urban flooding. And as you see, there is a range of priority actions within that cover a range of issues, from flood management to disaster management and access to basic essential services like water and sanitation. And this is essentially, how we have urbanized, reclaimed certain areas. And when we actually look at the flood hotspot map, you realize that, next, Kartiki, next. You realize that there is a lot of the flood hotspots are also in areas that earlier used to be marshes and really absorptive green infrastructures for the city, that have essentially been urbanized, built on, and a lot of these challenges are also what Sir was really dwelling on in his presentation. Please, we can actually just go next, because this is just and then in the context of climate change, these challenges essentially become a lot more catastrophic. So we're looking essentially at 4 different conditions of flood in the city. Whereas there's the coastal risk that is really coming from extreme storm surge, as the graph that Sir was talking about, the increasing tropical cyclones in the Arabian Sea. So the impact on the coast, especially in vulnerable communities like your fishing villages, etc., is much more than what it used to be even 5 years ago. You also see then certain low-lying areas, which are essentially all these kind of areas that have been built up between the islands that used to be marshes, that are then the kind of inland flood conditions. Your riverine edges, which are again lots of along most of our rivers, we have communities living, a lot of development that has come very close to the river, and the buffer areas of the river are essentially lost to a lot of development. So because of the overflow of the river, that is a different condition of flooding that we're seeing. And then on top of that, the 4th is essentially the above the green line conditions, where there are the extreme rainfall events. We are seeing many more of those. So that is pretty much where we are at, and I'll just hand over to Kartiki now to kind of walk us through how we should be understanding the whole context, the conversation of flood risk management.
Thank you, Lupana. So this has been an issue that has been talked about extensively. We've had several studies on it, and those studies range from really taking a look at large developments, or after a certain deluge, which were after the 1974 and 2005 deluges, or specifically after 2005, there were a lot of in-detail studies on the Mithi River. So this has been a talked about issue, but as we see, this problem statement has been changing. So we have this ongoing challenge of meeting demand with the stormwater drainage system, and that is still building up. But we also have other challenges where the problem is increasing in complexity, particularly when it spans across multiple sectors. So when you actually look across multiple sectors, we also need to start thinking about what outcomes these sectors think are a good outcome. One outcome for one sector might not be a good outcome for another sector. So in that case, how do we arrive at those outcomes? How do we define those? And then from there, how do we think about addressing gaps and barriers to meet those outcomes? So it's a moving target, this issue of flood risk. So there are certain challenges that we take with us, and there are certain that we will face imminently. And there is one positive change that has happened. We do have a lot of good studies on modeling. We have some good models. We have good data. what is the best way to use these tools that we have at our disposal to actually address this issue is something that we could start thinking about. And of course, the scale of assessment and intervention is an ongoing conversation. Many panelists here and many participants here have studied this issue at various scales. So when we think about different pieces of this problem, do we address them at different scales? And similarly, while looking at interventions, what scales do we look at? So that's another question that comes to mind. And when we're thinking of an integrated flood resilience, I won't even say strategy, a roadmap, what do we need? So it's not just Mumbai, as our minister said, it's a lot of cities, and especially coastal cities in South Asia, Southeast Asia, that have been facing this problem and are going to face climate change impacts very shortly and very quickly. So we looked at a few cities, and very quickly I'll show you some examples. So we looked at cities which were similar to Mumbai in terms of rainfall, in terms of the elevation and topography issue, in terms of financial situation, and also we referred to the example of Tokyo this morning. So we looked at that as well. And there are a mix of solutions here that cities have opted for. For example, Tokyo has gone for a large grey infrastructure solution which is called the GCANS, which is a huge holding tank which drains the floodplains. And it has done its job of keeping Tokyo dry. But then they are also facing the issue of increasing cyclones, and which could possibly pressure the system. And this is a locked-in investment. So that's a question that we should think about probably with grey infrastructure. They also have these, so they have a contrasting attitude towards nature, where they also have this in their culture where these several elements are incorporated already in city planning. Permeable surfaces, letting nature run its course, or having water features. So these can be elements which could also go into city planning. This is an example of Singapore. They were very grey infrastructure before, but they started facing three problems. One is importing water from Malaysia, stormwater reuse, and three is connecting their citizens to nature. So what they started doing was an overall plan for Singapore, where they started integrating nature-based solutions in their city plan to achieve these outcomes. And this you're seeing a before-after photo. So on the left is a before, on the right is an after. That is a bioengineered slope. And what they started seeing is an increase in 40% recharge in the groundwater system, which is 40% less stormwater in the stormwater drainage system. And they started implementing this solution throughout their system. So you can see an integrated system here on the right, where they have these smaller decentralized solutions like this garden, or the previous large solution that we saw, as part of their stormwater drainage system. Bangkok has a similar example, but they are just starting out. And this that you see on the right is actually a holding tank. This solves the neighborhood issue of stormwater flooding, and it is a self-sufficient system, and it also provides a green space to access. So that's how several cities are addressing this issue. Now we talked about solutions, and this graphic looks fairly incomplete. I can see that. So that's what my point is. Just looking at the solutions, be it these nature-based solutions or holding tanks, is only part of the solution. And I've put this in a very informal way because today we are here to start thinking about what directions we could move. So other pieces of the solution could be regulation for sustainable development, as we talked about this morning, accurate analysis and exchange of that knowledge, and a realistic vulnerability assessment. And to facilitate that, really we need a good interdepartmental and agency coordination. And that means it's not just the stormwater drainage sector that we are talking about. It's nature-based solutions, so gardens, roads and transport, urban development, response and preparedness, water supply, solid waste, and sewage disposal. And we have talked about all of these sectors already in our inaugural sessions, which is already telling us that we need to involve all of them for a more integrated approach. With that, I would like to kick off our first panel. And I would like to, I'm just checking if the panelists are all there. Yes. So with that, I'll introduce our first speaker. Our first panel is a more technical take on the flood risk in Mumbai. And I would like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Shubhankar Karmakar from IIT Mumbai. Dr. Shubhankar Karmakar is currently a professor and head at the Environmental Science and Engineering Department and associate faculty member at DST, Center of Excellence in Climate Studies, and Center for Urban Science and Engineering at IIT Bombay. He has received a Boycast Fellowship from the Government of India to pursue research on ecological modeling. His primary research interests are environmental systems analysis, uncertainty modeling, risk vulnerability analysis to climate-induced natural hazards. Over to you, Dr. Karmakar.
Yeah, so first of all, like very good afternoon, like everyone. I sincerely thank the Stormwater Drainage Department of BMC and World Resources Institute India for giving me the opportunity to participate in this consultative stakeholders workshop. Thank to Sri Velrasu, the Honorable Additional Municipal Commissioner Project, BMC, for taking the initiative. So in this basically 2 days workshop, I know this is very important topic, and the topic which was given to me, so this is very close to my heart. And basically I have been working on this flood risk assessment and the mapping for almost 10 years in IIT Bombay. And I know like 5 to 7 minutes is not adequate to discuss about the flood risk, but I made this presentation a bit technical. So, but I just wanted to show you few efforts and also like which we can implement, or we have been implementing this kind of work like over Mumbai study area also. I just wanted to show you a few slides on that, and I'll try to finish my presentation by 7 minutes. So next slide, please. Yeah, so these are the 4 projects actually I recently completed. The first one is on comprehensive mapping of flood risk. So we mapped the flood risk for entire Jagat Singhapur district. It is basically a multi-hazard prone area. So this study area is really different from other study areas. Actually, the riverian flood affects this region very much adversely. And ISRO suggested to take this particular study area, and we did a very comprehensive flood risk map at a village level. So around 1,300 villages we considered, and we did the vulnerability as well as hazard analysis, and then we combined these two, aggregated these two to find out the flood risk. Also, we have completed another project from ISRO, where we have considered the geomorphic indicators. So along with the socio-economic indicators of vulnerability, and we are getting similar result. But here the data, the second project is not so data intensive. That's why applicability of this geomorphic indicator would be more, because for data scarce region it is very difficult to perform flood risk. So that's why geomorphic approaches are, in this case geomorphic approaches are very efficient. Also, we have completed the project on near real-time urban flood forecasting for Mumbai, mainly like the Mithi River region. And here we have considered a cascade of models where rainfall forecasting as well as, mainly like the tidal height forecasting, and then how to combine them in the flood model. That too where 1D, 2D coupled model will be there. That means like overland flow as well as the channel flow, and also the tidal influences. This kind of modeling approach, this kind of modeling setup is very, very sensitive. So if you change the one of the inputs like rainfall, entire model setup will be part of, and then you may have to recalibrate it. So that's why running this kind of model was difficult, but we could establish a very good platform, modeling platform, which is stable enough. And also we completed another project where the fourth project, Professor Subhimal Ghosh was the PI and I was the co-PI. But flood modeling part I did using the same framework which we did for near real-time urban flood, flood forecasting from Mumbai. So for this Chennai area, actually we have basically we had multiple collaborators for this project, and we did basically the rainfall forecasting with NCMRWF. So NCMRWF, they have given us the medium range forecast, and that we have utilized by using some quantile based regression. We could downscale it, and for entire Chennai area, we could run this we could run the flood model, and other aspects are there. So because of shortage of time, I won't be able to discuss that. We did a cluster of models. Like first we did some hydrologic model, so that the inside whatever hydrodynamic model which are going to have, so that will get sufficient boundary condition. So first hydrologic model we ran, then inside the hydrologic model we ran the hydrodynamic model, and this cascade of model we ran to get the very high resolution inundation as well as the velocity. So then if you please next. So next. Yeah, so the first two are the Riverian, case studies, and the framework has been transferred to National Remote Sensing Center, ISRO. The second, the third and fourth, if you press once more. Yeah, so these two are really like the urban case studies, and the setup was transferred to NCCR. So and then it was known as ICMAM. So and the entire setup now NCCR is taking care of. So we have in the same panel we have Dr. Usha. So she will be able to give more detail on that. So next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the main motivation of this flood risk analysis. What I found that Jonkman in 2013 in Nature Climate Change, he has published a paper, and during that time only Stefan Halligate also, he has shown that particularly coastal cities, like 20 global cities he identified, and out of these 20 global cities, he found that 4 cities from India are very prone to urban flood. That we have tested also, and we found that mainly like Mumbai and Chennai we compared, we found the propensity of damage due to the tidal flood over Mumbai is much higher than Chennai. So yeah, so next slide please. Yeah, but we make numerous approximation and simplification whenever we deal with coastal flooding, because of data scarce situation. Oftentimes we feel that we may have to impose some maybe like the assumptions, and because of that we usually most of the time we can't capture the reality. So that's why this numerous approximation which we do, so that we should not do. So next slide please. Yeah, so in this concept of risk, I just wanted to say a couple of things. Like the concept of risk was first given by Lawrence in 1976, where he mentioned that risk should be combination of probability or the chance of damage, and thus mainly like the severity. Severity may be in terms of like damage also. So probability and severity, if you multiply or any other aggregation operation, we get the risk. So next. Yeah, so basically assessment of risk means that answering the triplet of questions. If you press once more. Yeah, so that these triplet questions like what can go wrong, what is likelihood that it would go wrong, and what are the consequences. And flood basically risk management is again like triplet of questions like what can be done, what are the associated trade-off in terms of cost, benefit, risk, and what are the impact of the current management decisions. So next slide please. But the problem is like risk is also basically I would say it is an index. And in this kind of index, the problem is the risk index is not only an index, it is probabilistic in nature. At the same time, like for risk index, you need to consider the other components. So Slovik, when he published his science paper, so where he has mentioned first time that risk should be combination of these three, like hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. So same concept was adopted by basically like Oppenheimer in his IPCC AR5 report. And where also he has mentioned that there are hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. all three components we should calculate separately, and we should combine them to find out the risk. Now here a set of uncertainties are there. One more time, please.
Dr. Karmakar, if we could wrap up.
Yeah, so just this slide, and then I will go to the last slide. So now here hazard is basically the probabilistic part where the climate change impact, everything we are including. Vulnerability part is basically physical vulnerability, infrastructure, social vulnerability, all sort of vulnerability we can consider. And exposure part is similar to vulnerability, but here the dynamic nature of the change of the the indicators will be less than the vulnerability indicator. But these definitions are very much overlapping. You can see many conflicting definitions also. But these definitions are taken from AR5 and AR6 of IPCC. If you now go to the last slide. Yes. So through all this modeling exercise, what we did, actually, what I realized for Mumbai, before that, yeah. So lessons learned, just few things I just wanted to tell. Whenever we run any 1D, 2D model, a three-way couple model, mainly for the tidal flood model, which is very, very important component, because hazard part is most important component in this risk assessment. Saint-Venant equation is not valid for steep slope. So, but Mumbai case study, if you see, there is a variation of steep slope. Even if you take the Mithi River region, around 17.3 kilometer length, almost 7 kilometer, the slope is, like I would say, very flat. Like otherwise, the slope, mainly like the Vihar Lake, if you see the portion, mainly the upstream part, their slope is very high. So a single Saint-Venant equation will not solve the, the entire flood model. So entire case study won't be able to solve. Also, we realized that kinematic wave technique could be applied for the overland flow routing. So anyway, but this is new investigation through which we identified that we can use simple kinematic wave model, and through that also you can model the overland flow. Absence of accurate river bathymetry, which we found that for Mithi River somehow we could manage and found the river bathymetry, but accurate estimation of river bathymetry for Mithi River is required. I know because of dredging and other things, the bathymetry or underwater topography is rapidly changing, but still I think accurate bathymetry is required, and that should be updated in the flood model. There is no provision of observed flood footprint. So observed flood footprint we should have for any modeling exercise. I know multiple projects IIT will be taking and will be given to IIT. IIT also will run the same model. But I think as long as, if we improve the flood footprint, the historical flood footprint information, then only we can improve the modeling exercise. So 1D, 2D coupled model when we do, so that, that is always very, very unstable. So that I already mentioned. So for making a stable platform is, one more important task. Numerical weather prediction for rainfall, which is basically assisting the flood forecasting, more effort should be given not only for the work-based, basically weather research forecasting model-based precipitation forecast. We should take the advantage of GEFS forecast, which are globally available. Also, NCMR WF forecast. So that also we should downscale. Yeah. So yeah, these are the lessons learned. I wanted to say sorry for taking some extra time, but these are the important points which we must discuss actually. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karmakar. We will actually, the format is such that we'll just hear from the panelists before, because it's a short presentation, and we'll have time for questions after. So we have Dr. Roxy Matthew Cole joining us online from the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology. I'll do a very short intro. He's the climate scientist at Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, and he's currently studying leading research on climate change in the Indo-Pacific region and its impact on the monsoon, cyclones, and the marine ecosystem. He's chair of the CLIVAR Indian Ocean Regional Panel and lead author on the IPCC reports. Over to you, Dr. Roxy Matthew Cole.
Thanks to all. I'm happy to be here, and I listened to the inaugural session and the talks by Aditya Thackeray and Valershu as well. And I'm happy to see that BMC is working on this important issue of flood risk, assessing the flood risk and also working on it. Yeah, and I'm sorry that I couldn't travel because I just recovered from a mild fever and cold and cough, so my health condition was not that great for traveling, though even though I'm near to Pune, at Pune and near to Mumbai. Yeah, so I hope you all can hear me well and fine. I will try to share my presentation. Could you please unshare audio on screen? Okay. I'm sorry I can't hear, I can't see you all, but anyway. So I'm a climate scientist working at the Indian Institute of Tropical Meteorology, and here I would be presenting more from a climate change perspective on what are the factors affecting Mumbai in terms of the numbers and all. I'm not an engineer, so for engineering solutions, of course, we have people like Shubhankar Karmakar, IIT Bombay team and others. So let's look at, sorry, I'm unable to share my screen. So it says host disabled participant screen sharing. Yeah, okay. So I will go into a few factors that are affecting Mumbai and the West Coast. And like I said, I work on large-scale climate science, but also look into regional aspects as well. So some of these points, interestingly, Wellers, who had the additional commissioner today, had talked in his inaugural talk, and I was happy to see that BMC already has some of the important information in hand. But one of the factors that I would like to emphasize here is that other than rainfall, there are multiple factors that are working together. And some are climate or weather-related factors, and some are other infrastructure-related factors. So we might need data from all these different departments. So for rainfall data, of course, we might depend on IMD or irrigation or other administrative sections, but there is data that we need from different other sectors, which I will go through. So that means we might need interdepartmental cooperation, data sharing, make sure that this data is available in the public space, so that researchers, engineers, and also local administration can work on that. Yeah, and also we need experts working on interdisciplinary aspects of flooding. Yeah, so here in this you have a image of how the trend of extreme rainfall events have changed over time across India. And we have Mumbai here, and all these yellow-red colors that we see here, that is where the extreme rainfall events, widespread extreme rainfall events are increasing. And we see that Mumbai is in the confluence of where the extreme rainfall events are increasing. And it's the same picture for central West Maharashtra also, including that Mahabaleshwar region where we had extreme rainfall events last year. Yeah. So we see a threefold rise in extreme rainfall events during the last 70 plus years. Yeah. So this is data from 1950s to recent, and the orange red line here shows the increase in extreme rainfall events, including parts of Maharashtra and Mumbai. Yeah, this is a larger box over this region, but the picture is same for Mumbai also, kind of same for Mumbai also, because this is a region where the monsoon winds act from the Arabian Sea region, cross north of Western Ghats, and play as westerly moisture carrying westerlies across the central Indian region, including Maharashtra. Yeah? So there is a consistent rise in extreme rainfall events, and this is projected to increase further. So what you see here is the number of extreme events increasing, but at the same time, the intensity And the area covered by these extreme weather events are also increasing across most parts of central India and Maharashtra also. So this red globe here is increasing, is intensifying, and same for Mumbai also, because that's like the gateway of this westerlies over this region. Yeah? And at the same time, the total amount of rainfall, Wellers who had explained this briefly, the total amount of rainfall that we receive over these regions are also declining. So that means we have more number of heavy rainfall events intermittent with long dry spells. So over long periods of time, there is no rain, but when it rains, places like Mumbai receives the amount of rain of, it can be an amount of rain of a season or a month in a few hours to a few days. So that shift in monsoon pattern has already happened. It's a large scale shift in monsoon pattern, and it's reflected over Mumbai as well. Yeah. And this is a picture where I show the trend or the changes in total amount of rainfall over the same period since the 1950s until recently. So the yellow to red colors, yellow to brown colors here show where it is drying, and you can see along the coast of Maharashtra, the Konkan coast, including the parts of Mumbai, you can see yellow to red colors. But if we go slightly east, you can see the total amount of rainfall is also increasing. So we need to be watchful of this change in rainfall, the total amount of rainfall and the extreme rain events. And if you consider regions like Mumbai, there might be spatial variability within Mumbai, within the greater Mumbai region itself, which means that even though agencies like IMD have a long-term data, daily data, Velashu was talking about the lack of data. So we might need higher resolution data within cities, yeah, to show how within the city itself the regional variability is there, and which are the those points, bottlenecks, where these heavy rainfalls result in floods as well. We need to identify those bottlenecks, those regions where the floods are happening, where the heavy rains are happening as well.
Dr.
Now,
Cole, let's take a minute.
Coming on to other aspects of flooding, one of the most important factors is sea level. Now, in the inaugural section, we heard that the sea level is rising gradually. Of course, it is rising gradually, but as it accumulates, the impact of sea level is huge, and it's not. We should not assess it independently. One of the problems with assessing floods or rainfall is that we assess rainfall as a separate factor, sea level as a separate factor, storm surge as a separate factor. But it all accumulates to the floods that we are having. Yeah? And this
Dr.
is a
Cole?
picture from during high tide and storm surge over Mumbai. And we might see, houses and families it's like this along the coast who are the largest, most vulnerable. So we need to see how it affects different sets of population. The vulnerable population, which is increasing, and there is a study recently saying that there is huge migration from villages or agricultural regions in the north, like Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, and all, towards mega cities like Mumbai. So
Dr. Cole, in the interest of time.
But they are
Hello?
migrating to mega cities like Mumbai, where they do not have adequate roofing or housing, yeah, and they are facing a different set of climate vulnerabilities like this. But at the same time, in the far, you can see high rises where they are facing a different set of climatic conditions. So we need to see how this is playing for the vulnerable and not so vulnerable population. Yeah. Sure. So how much more time do I have? Do I have like 3 minutes? Okay. I was not aware of the time, but anyway, so the most important factor is that these all accumulate together. So The one in a century event could be a one in a year event when the sea level rise also is factored in. And sea level rise, it is at 3 millimeter per year. It is small if you consider year-wise, but if you consider 10 years, a decade, it becomes 3 centimeters, and then it becomes much more important to consider. And the other factor that we need to consider is the change in the number of cyclones. So this is from the earlier period, 1980s, and this is in the 2000s. You can see there is a 52% increase in the number of cyclones. And the red and black shows the pre-monsoon and the post-monsoon cyclones. Both have increased over the Arabian Sea. And the increase is in the very severe cyclones, 150% increase, and the duration also. Yeah, and that results in huge storm surges, like what we see in Mumbai, above 5 meters and all. So these kind of storm surges and how they lead to this kind of floodings also we need to consider. And climate change is not always the culprit. We need to consider how for example, the Miti River and how the infrastructure is laid out, because that can lead into excessive flooding for nearby regions. Yeah. This is a picture of Mumbai. I don't need to explain. This is kind of my last slide. Can you picture a river here? This is the Miti River. This is supposed to be the Miti River, and we need to supposed to have a lot of mangroves over this year. So IPCC also calls for an ecosystem-based adaptation measure, which can work along with this flood adaptation measures that we see, instead of just artificial measures or moving or relocating. Ecosystem-based adaptation. That's it. Thank you. Thanks a lot for inviting me to this session.
Thank you, Roxy. So I'd like to invite Dr. Tune Usha for our next presentation. And please keep the presentations to 5 to 7 minutes. We are already running quite late and we want to have very interesting discussions.
Of Maharashtra. So this we all know, so I just skip this. So these are the two operational flood warning systems available in India. One it is called as integrated flood warning system for Chennai, and the other one is for Mumbai. How it evolved, I'll just tell you. So in 2015, when Chennai floods happened, the office of the PSA initiated a project with IIT Mumbai in the lead, wherein we developed the Chennai flood warning system, which has now been upgraded to integrated flood warning system. The difference between both, I'll tell you. It is very important to work with the administrators, because there's no point in just developing a system if somebody doesn't use it. So we have close interaction with the Tamil Nadu government and MCGM as well while developing this system. So this is for Chennai and this is for Mumbai. Both were inaugurated by the CMs and things like that. So a system is in place. Now how the system works is what I will tell you. Now the whole world is moving towards the phrase that we have to tell what the weather will do. It is called as impact-based forecasting. So it is in the SOP of the IMD. So both the integrated flood warning systems of Chennai and Mumbai have been accounted in this SOP for impact-based forecasting. So this is a modular structure and this is how the entire system works. So we have a data assimilation module. This is very data intensive. So we have a data assimilation module wherein we feed real-time data on meteorology, hydrology, and a lot of thematic layers in GIS. Then we have a flood module which runs the flood modules twice a day, every time there's a rainfall. Then we have the inundation module which captures the vulnerability and risk. And finally, how we disseminate it to the government. So these are all the various data sets that go into the module. So we have data on elevation. MCGM provided it with elevation data for Mumbai, which is at 1 meter. Every 1 meter there's a grid point. And we collected a lot of data on the bathymetry along the rivers, and we have the land use, land cover data and things like that. Then we also have the met data coming in from every 4x4 there is a rainfall point. So that kind of data comes in from MCMRWF center. Then we have data on hydrology, that is river level, discharge and things like that. And this model also takes account of riverine flooding, coastal flooding, and in case of storm surge, all those are accounted in these in this iFlows. So this is the kind of data sets that we have for elevation and bathymetry. So bathymetry data has been assimilated. So these are the different kinds of met data that goes into the system. For every 4x4, we have a grid point. It comes in twice a day, one at 0 UTC and 12 UTC. And we also have GFS, WRF. The various different kinds of weather models are also a part of this system. Apart from that, there are about 80 rain gauge stations, which this data is provided by MCGM. Every 15 minutes, we get the current rainfall data that is collected from the field. So much of data is part of the system. So how the system works is that 3 days in advance, we know what would be the rainfall pattern. This comes from the weather models. This is updated twice a day. So if like this clearly shows that this northern part is going to have more rainfall compared to the southern part. So in that case, so we take this data as the input and we run the model. Apart from that, since Mumbai, we have to take consideration of the tide also. So data from the tide also goes into the model. Similarly, data from all the river gauges, that data is also given to us from MCGM. This is also going into the system. The entire architecture works like this. So the data, the rainfall that happens in the upstream, that is accounted for, and how the water comes into the river and then how it translates in the floodplain. So this is how we take the upstream hydrology, the riverine flood, urban flood, and ocean hydrodynamics. Everything is taken care of. This entirely works on Mike 21. We are not using any open source because it's an operational model. We cannot afford to take any chances. So it is everything works on Mike platform only.
Dr. Usha, let's take 1 minute to wrap up.
Okay, so I just show you. So these are the kind of outputs that are available. So every time there is a rainfall, so you can run your okay, so there are a lot of data available, and we have so much of vulnerability and risk information also feeding into the model. So finally, this is this entire infographic. So we have data coming in from the weather models, tide and storm surge, that comes into our server. We run the model and give outputs like this. So this is the actual model output. This is translated at ward level. At ward level, we are able to calculate and tell you how many buildings are affected, how many roads are affected, and things like that. But of course, there's so much more. Since I don't have time, I'm just rushing through. I'll just tell you the various. Finally, this will be our output. We will tell you at how many wards will be affected, and even in the wards which are at high risk, low risk, and what are the actions that you need to take. So this is the output that is given every 12 hours. Output can be generated from the system. Of course, everything depends on the accuracy of the rainfall that is predicted. Because of that, MCGM Navrekar sir wanted every 6 hours from the field data, how do you produce a vulnerability map? That is also in place. Then there's no point in simply running the system without validating it. So we also collect field data and see whether your prediction is good or bad. So many points have been collected, and this is the level of work that we do. And these are some of the challenges. So instead of using one set of data, we are trying to use an ensemble now. Topographic data need to be updated, the drainage network has to be incorporated, and more field data points to capture street level inundation. So this is the kind of work. So I'll just skip all this. So this is the final. This is how, I hope this video works. So this is how this entire. So this is a fully operational web GIS based system that is in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Usha, and thank you really for keeping time. With this, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Ravindra Punde from the School of Environment and Architecture. He is an architect and urban regional planner, and he's the co-founder of the landscape and planning practice Design Cell, which works from Gurgaon and Mumbai. He has extensive experience in master planning, landscape, and urban projects. He has maintained a strong commitment to environmentally and culturally sensitive design, and his practice extends in many parts of India. He is taught at the School of Planning and Architecture and has been the principal of Academy of Architecture, Mumbai. Thank you, Dr. Ravindra Punde.
Can I start? Yeah, okay. I am actually representing now the School of Environment and Architecture, which is a school started by architects, and it's quite an honor for me to say that there are 3 speakers today, including me, who are going to be speaking, who belong to the school. Rohit is already here. Pankaj, who is also a trustee of the school, will also be here. And I have my colleague Abhijit Egbote here with me. He's actually sprained his foot, and the foolish guy was trying to walk on the pavements of Mumbai, and he sprained his foot. But anyway, I got him here because he's the GIS man. And so I just wanted to quickly run you through a studio that we did in the school. As you noticed, the school's name bears environment before architecture, and so that's more or less the philosophy with which we operate at the school. This is a studio we did in the 9th semester, which is just a 6-week project. 40 students, 4 faculty members, 2 of whom could not join, unfortunately, but that's the exercise. What can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, so I'm going to briefly kind of tell you what the purpose is. One of the things when it started, we are all designers. We love to speculate. At the end of it all, it's all about how we see the future. And so as a designer, that's the question that we ask. And so we took the IPCC report and kind of started working with the students on the idea, on the question of flooding, and started looking at what is the future of the city and what could be the possible solutions we could come to. So that was one of the prime objectives in terms of teaching learning. It is also the other objective was that students begin to kind of, appreciate larger issues and kind of begin to frame their architectural understanding within that. So let's go to the next slide. Right, so the flooding issue, one of the first things we wanted to dismantle, and it came from all of us as faculty, is the idea of looking at the land use plan. I think if you want to look at the city for its environmental situation, I think it's very important we look at it through the lens of watersheds. Not engineering watersheds that we create, but the natural watersheds. And so we actually started also evolving a way of thinking that there are 3 stratums that we need to look at, 3 layers. One is the natural system, because quite simply from what we heard this morning, the moment the rain goes beyond 25 mm per hour, water has its memory and it catches up with the first stratum, which is the natural system, and begins to drain and move that way. Our engineering confidence is so overloaded that we believe that we can manage everything, and we will keep on confronting, I think. And so the question is, do we want to be with nature in sync, or do we want to begin to live with the topography and the ground, or do we want to constantly confront, engineer, remodel our landscapes? So that's the question that we were working with. Can we go to the next slide? So we just took a small part of North Mumbai, and we first drew out the entire watershed system. Now, I am quite shocked to know that there is data available at 1 meter interval, and then just now I saw a sneaky slide where there is a 20 centimeter interval data that's available. We didn't get it. And I'm just wondering if we had it, if academic institutions had it, they could have been able to kind of, think of it in a much, much deeper and a finer way. And I think all of this beautiful data that one heard about, I think has to come into public domain. Has to. Because this is collective responsibility. Please. I think it's very important that all institutions begin to share information, because this is our joint responsibility. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is a diagram which actually we sketched while thinking about what the studio should be. So actually, if you see, there are 3 stratums. One is the natural system that one is talking about, which is imagining that there is no built. It's the natural flows of things. Number 2 is what we call the economic order. And this is now human imagination, property, boundary. Nature does not know these things. It doesn't work that way, right? And the third is the new thing that's emerging. Are we willing to embrace the cloud, that is the digital world, which is going to come and change and transform many things for all of us? So Let's go to the next slide. I think one of the best things of working with an institution, an academic institution, is you have a gang of 40 students. And so the students went out to the field, and all this data that we are talking about, I think very often we miss the fine grain on ground. And so how do you get that data? So we got in touch with, we kind of brought in technology to see how we can get that data back. And so we devised various methods of what is the kind of conversation you want to have with people in the slums. I can't tell him your level is 99.663. What was the level of flooding in 2005? They can't tell me, right? So we devised very simple methods of asking very elementary questions of was there knee water, was there ankle deep water, was there waist deep water, and then we interpreted that data. So go to the next slide. This is Abhijit's domain, and I think in the course of discussion, I'm sure I would like him to participate and explain what this is. So we kind of created a whole system of generating forms, asking questions, geotagging them, and so the students would just go on getting information on the form, geotag it on their phones, and that became a huge database for us to actually understand many things. For example, there is no way that the data can collect information of the fear of the sound of water at night when the water begins to kind of flow. That needs different kind of support. And it doesn't sit into the realm of our administrative network. So we need to look at many aspects of these problems. And so that is one of the big things that we did. Can we go to the next one?
Mr. Punde, one last minute.
One more full minute, right? Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you. So we mapped that data together, and so I'm going to it's just showing where was it that it was waist high, knee high, and then we kind of geotagged that data. Can we go to the next slide? Right, so one of the other exercises that was also done concurrently by another group of students was to historically see how that part of the city was growing. And there was some wisdom in the past, which was that there were settlements on high grounds, the low grounds were left to be what they were, right? The minister just spoke about Kalanagar. I don't think Kalanagar ever needed to exist where it did, right? It is one of the worst places to build anything. We've done the same thing with Mumbai University. It's sitting right in the larger expanse of the water bowl that it does. So this was one of the quick studies. Can we go to the next slide, please? And then, of course, the students made actually a physical model of the whole thing, and we did, various consultations with various stakeholders. And so we got the politician, we got the administrator, we got the local experts, and everybody to kind of, have a quick conversation with the students and try to understand perceptions. That's the other thing. Perceptions of people, of all these issues. How do we document it? Where does it come in? So that's a big issue that we need to understand. Can we go to the next one? And so we drew out, through all these conversations, various levels of vulnerability. And so if you really see, some of the most vulnerable ones are the settlements. So 1 in 5 was affected by the sea level rise, right? It was likely to be affected, and so on and so forth. So we kind of mapped that. Can we go to the next slide? So basically we were looking at various things of what is the open space system, what is the built space, what is the infrastructure, and then what is the climate change impact that's likely to happen. So if you see the blue, that's the extent of water ingress that is likely to happen. Along with it, mind you, all your outfalls will get choked. So it's not just here, it's also upstream that's going to kind of create problems for all of us. And so what do we do? So go to the next slide, please. So as I said, we didn't have the contour map, but the students conjectured from Abhijit's help and all of it, and actually began to think of the space in section. Traditional wisdom. High ground is the best place to be. Let the low ground be. And so what could be your development strategies going forward. And so actually this is a sectional expression of various zones that the students identified, what urban form strategies we can have for each zone and all of that, right? And so there were various architectural expressions that the students generated. Can we go to the next slide?
Wait, could we wrap up quickly?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay, so you can stop. So one of the things that we started wondering was that don't we already have the instruments to actually bring about change? TDR, what is in the way of a new landscape that we need to create, we can actually build a purpose to the law. Right now, it's only FSI and densification. But the purpose now could be an improved environmental state, right? We need a huge landscape strategy. We need to convert landscape into, or the open space system into an infrastructure level kind of thing then rather than just parks and open spaces. And we can use many instruments that are already there within our legal framework to develop. Can we go further? Last slide. Okay, so the students basically developed 3-level strategies. What needs to be done immediately, what needs to happen by 35, and what needs to happen by 50. Broadly, the fundamental idea was that we need to do some immediate action relief things in the immediate. By 2035, we need to kind of restructure those settlements that are extremely vulnerable right now. And finally, we are talking about 2050, and we are talking of actually restructuring the city through our developmental strategy with a great focus on its open space system and a new landscape for the city that is resilient and responsive to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Punde. I'd like to introduce our last speaker for this panel, Raj Bhagat from World Resources Institute, India. He works as a Senior Program Manager, Geoanalytics for Sustainable Cities and Transport at WRI India at the Bangalore office, and he supports projects associated with water, transport, and energy. He has worked as a freelancer for projects related to GIS, remote sensing, statistical modeling, and web development with multiple clients. Over to you, Raj.
Hello, everyone. So my presentation will be on using flood simulation models for planning purposes, actually. I mean, most of my presentation has thoughts and information that has already been talked about. But still, I want to talk a little bit more on the gist and how we should be going about when we talk about all these technical ideas that we are talking about, right? So that it is from that. The root comes from our vision for how do we use data, and we are not looking at it from a very academic sense. We want it to be useful, right? Like we want models to be useful, we want data to be useful, and how do we achieve that? It is not about knowing which place is going to flood. It is not. It is about knowing how do we solve it, right? Like that is the most critical aspect of it. So it is from that vision this whole presentation is set. And so very simple, I mean, our flood models, I mean, Madam was already talking about Mike, etc. And when I started exploring this around 7-8 years ago, my biggest problem was that if I can create state-of-the-art models, but who is going to use it, right? Like so it has to be open source, right? So it cannot be, and it has to be cheap. It has to be, I mean, if it is not open source, it has to be cheap and it has to be easily adoptable. And it can't remain to a few academics. That was the biggest thing. So initially I began coding it myself. So I developed a model from, I mean, it's a very simple thing. You can look at your carpet right now. You are having grids, right? So basically it functions as a simple hydraulic model, and you take water bottle and you just pour water on it. Where will it flow? And if we talk about that, then the rest of the things will come into the place, right? So that is the idea behind it. And of course, it is going to depend on lots of factors, right? Like whether there is water there already, or what is the amount of rainfall, whether there is stormwater drain, etc., etc. And once you have that, you'll be able to prepare a model, right? So that is very simple. Now, this is where the challenge is, as well as the input for the model is, right? So today morning, I think AMC was talking about the usefulness of these models, right? And it is not the models that are problematic, it is always the input data that is always problematic, right? So we don't have the best representation for the city or for that matter for the entire country. What are we talking, I mean, what is the topography? He was just mentioning about 0.2 meter contour, etc., etc. Do we have that data? And that is the biggest challenge. And if the data is there in the right place, then the models will always work. But it is this is that is becoming the challenge. And so we had, we created using satellite images and manual digitization, and we began doing it a little bit from ourselves. And so we began going towards in the, preparing high resolution models of it. And the other is the bathymetry was also very critical for us and for these context. What is the high tide line? What is the low tide line? And because, see, one more thing about Mumbai is that we do, of course, have mountains, but most of the city is going to be, actually, it is an extension of the continental shelf, right? Like, so it is basically a continental shelf that has been filled. And so it means it's a very flat terrain. And so you can see the depth profile around the city also. You have, Thane Creek is around 15, 16 meter, and that is also because it's manually dredged. And it is such a low, depth area, and that means it's very flat. I mean, that reflects in the South Bombay area and everything around that. So this is a very critical input. And actually, AMC sir also talked about, the effects of cyclones and storm surges and everything around that. These all form input and, of course, built-up area, and estimation of built-up area is another big problem. You can have a good model of topography and everything, but we need to know how much percolates and how much is not going to percolate and what is going to run and what is not going to run. And, of course, vegetation plays a role, and stormwater drain. This is another big challenge. And, I mean, at least in Mumbai, you have some GIS data about stormwater drains. In most of the cities, we don't have anything on stormwater drains. In fact, there's a question on what is a stormwater drain itself is becoming a question. And anyway, we began utilizing all those data. And this analysis, actually, we did part of the Mumbai Climate Action Plan is actually very critical. If you look at this map and look at the years and everything, you can notice that the extreme rainfall events have always been happening. 20 centimeter rainfall or 30 centimeter rainfall, and everything has been happening. And this is very critical because why I'll say that it is critical is the way we apply the model. See, for us, it doesn't, as I said earlier, it is about how do we use it in planning. So personally, there are three ways to use it. One is short-term flood forecast. Everyone talks about, like, I mean, you get the rainfall right now from weather models and you start predicting it and everything around that. And then there is, preparation of hazard maps that you can use it in master plans and long-term planning, what should be zoning and everything around that. And the third is using in infrastructure and interventions. I see the applications mostly in the bottom two, not on the short-term flood forecasting. Now, why I say that is, your flood weather model has a problem. You can't predict clearly. I mean, you have accuracy issues with respect to whether you can say whether there is rain or not. And even if there is a rain, you can't exactly tell about the intensity. There is always a problem with intensity. And even if you have the intensity right, then you have computational troubles. You have to finish that run and everything of the model, and it is always troublesome. And you have so many question marks. And even if I successfully predict it, now what is the point, right? So today I'm going to tell you that tomorrow it is going to flood in X place. What is the point? I mean, what decisions? I mean, you can save a few lives, of course. I mean, that is, will be affected. But you can't plan the city for it, right? So that is the most critical part of it. And so you have to move from, I mean, all the thoughts around, the technical thoughts around the flood forecast should move towards the planning aspect of things, right? So, I mean, my point is, don't worry about whether it is going to rain on June 26 or July 26. Create scenarios of tides, create scenarios of rainfall, and start telling right now during summer where it is going to flood right now. And then create insights for each of these scenarios. And with those insights, you tell what is the solution. That is where so for example, so I'll skip all these slides on how you can do it. And say, for example, I simulated a rainfall event, and what is the status of stormwater drain, which are running in full capacity and which is not running in full capacity. And if I construct a new drain, I mean, don't change rainfall parameters. Change the infrastructure parameters. Change about how much permeability is going to be there, or change those things. Then you'll understand whether your solution is going to work or not. And for example, I put a new stormwater drain and which are the places that are going to be affected or not affected, etc. Similarly, we did an exercise in Bangalore. If you have rainwater harvesting in every house, then what will be the effect on stagnation, etc., etc. Because this will help you in figuring out the policies and planning interventions. So it need not be this one. Like for example, Karthik was talking about converting from a concrete drain to a one with more natural infrastructure. We can put those things and we can figure out that. So it is from that, and if you want to do this from a technical point of view, the first thing is data. We need to figure out a good method for data collection. We need to figure out. We have to create frameworks for it. Everything is there in some place, some random computers, etc., etc. We have to bring all of them together, and the most important part is you have to make the data public, so that every researcher can use it, right? So, see, I believe that there are better modelers, there are better coders than me. There are thousands of people who can do it better than me. But how many people in India can do this model right now? Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 people, right? Why is that? It is not because of their skill. It is just because of the access, right? So we have to break that. We have to bring this topography data, we have to bring the stormwater drain data, everything to the public domain. Of course it will attract criticism on the day 1, but day 30 it will be utilized by everybody, right? So that is the second. And then you have to focus a little bit on scenario building, you have to start assessing interventions so that it will be useful. I'm not seeing the flood models as solutions. I'm seeing it as an enabler for solutions, because you're going to invest lots of money into it. One thing that we have been facing as a challenge is that, of course, we can talk about the technical viability of a project from a hydrological standpoint, and we can talk about financial viability also. But one thing is that the interventions which the models are going to say that this will work or that will work, what would be the effect of it on public, on socio-economic factors, right? So that is still a challenge for me, something that I'll be learning a little bit more. But of course, we'll be using Mumbai, and we'll be trying to figure out. But at least the technical side of things, we can done. Technical side of things, we can strategize a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Raj. With this and being the bad timekeeper, I'm just going to open it up for questions now for a few minutes before I can jump in with a few questions of my own. So let's have about 10 minutes for questions, which is not ideal, but
the 2005 report, after the 2005 floods, there was a major study that was carried out. And one of the recommendations of that was that the walls along the rivers and nalas have to be in gabion walls. But none of those things are actually seen. Today what we see along the rivers and nalas are very thick, monolithic RCC concrete walls with a big foot that goes right into the bed of the river. That is something that I really don't know. And this is a question to someone from the MCGM, SWD, maybe they can answer this.
I am Dr. Ashtankar from SWD department. It has been, this issue has been addressed number of times by various environmentalists and in way of sustainable city. We are using concrete on both the banks of rivers or for carrying out the big training of material or some other nalas, etc. But it is done because our nalas and rivers are polluted with the sewerage. Mostly they are 50% or 60% sewage is carried out. Not their name is only stormwater drain, but they are not in fact stormwater drains. So as per Indian standards, these environmental conditions are extremely severe. So for that particular extremely severe condition, we are bound to use high density concrete, and that is M40 grade of concrete minimum we have to use. So we have to follow that codal practices. Bureau of Indian Standard have specified that for exposure condition is extremely deteriorating. So if we construct gabion walls or simple normal concrete walls, they will not serve the design life of 50 years or 40 years, and they will get deteriorated, and reinforcement corrosion will occur very rapidly. So that issue is handled, and it was based on IIT recommendations. We are following those guidelines. Thanks.
Do any of the panelists have questions? We could alternate between the panelists and participants.
I'll just go ahead. It was a very interesting session altogether. About the models, I have one question. I think the aspect about dissemination was mentioned, but there was no elaboration actually on what are the modes of dissemination. One, to a larger public per se, because otherwise I find there are these standardized kind of announcements over television or on radio, which actually serve no purpose. Because I think even our meteorological updates and predictions are all haywire. There was a time when they predicted heavy rainfall. I would definitely take the rain. And if they predicted low rainfall, which means you have to be a little bit wary, right? So it's so off the mark. So this larger public, and if one is talking about very nuanced, locality-based, ward-based predictions, then there has to be a customized dissemination to the particular area as well. So are there thoughts along those lines in your coordination with the corporation? The second is the dissemination within the corporation. And I think this concentration itself is like an interesting dialogue where there are engineers from BP and SWM and water, I hope, and others as well. I definitely do think sewage, drain, and the solid waste also need to be brought in if they are not there. But is there this dialogue happening about what are the implications of these models on their own protocols, norms, ISO-based norms for construction or for infrastructure?
As regards dissemination of information to the citizens, so we have multiple mode of communication. Like the mobile app is available on Android and the iOS both. Disaster management initiative, you can download it. It's a free downloadable app, just 4 MB app, and we are upgrading it with the iFlows output also. So that will be available from the 15th May or the first week of June to the citizens. This is number one. Number two, we are very active on Twitter.
That will be a locality-based app?
Yes. Whatever output is coming from NCCR will be available in the public domain. Number two, the Twitter. We are very active on my BMC Twitter handle. You can follow us. You will get all updates from the control periodically. We are active on Instagram. We are active on Facebook. We are on a chatbot.
That those apps and the general information available on these apps is not credible at all.
So it will be a real time. It's a dynamic app. 15 minutes rainfall will be available. All the details are available. Tomorrow morning I'm going to present. I will show you the app's features also. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Prashant Ramugure. I'm looking after Mithi River project, and I'm very glad to hear to know some of from the the people like everyone is concerned about the Mithi River, and people are talking about the Mithi River. So first of all, I would like to give the answer of one of our participants. Like we have constructed the gabion wall. It is not like that we have not constructed the gabion wall. It is at the lower side of the MMRDA portion. If you travel around that in the BKC area, there are a gabion wall. But obviously, due to the technicality and some of the engineering problems, and due to the urbanizing, basically the river is itself flowing from the urban area. So due to the land use pattern of that particular area, we have constructed RCC retaining wall. But I would like to add into that, we have never done any concreting inside the river. So we have also kept the balance between the environmental aspect and at the same time the technical aspects like the engineering concepts. Then second point, my question is to the panelists, like Dr. Padmakar is here, so I'm very glad, sir, you have done certain study on 1D model and 2D model with the Mithi River. So first of all, sir, it would be great help to us, since you have done it in the period of 2014 and 18, so it will be a latest updated data which can be utilized by the MCGM. And I'm still struggling with the data which is available with us officially. So if you can submit it, the report copies and all those things to the MCGM, that would be great help to the people like me. Second thing, sir, we are talking about the models. So, okay, so we are also dealing with the models and all, and we know the importance of the forecasting and all. So you said that it's a near real time, sir. My request is that I do has all those access and all everything. So can you induce the AI and can you please make it something which is a real modeling kind of things, because that is the need of the society, that is the need of the future. So if you have algorithms, if you have something modeling which can be based on the AI, right? Because for IIT, AI is not a new thing. They are masters in that, so that would be great help for the MCGM as well as for the citizens. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, so actually I'll answer the second question. So first I'll answer that. So basically, like near real-time we should use, because we can't have any forecasting model which can operate at mainly like real time. You can't do. So that's why near real-time term we are used. There is some technical difficulty whenever you will be using any precipitation forecast. It will always come in the form of like ensemble. For example, GEFS forecast if you use, GEFS data if you see from 2007 to 2013, you have 23 ensembles. And from 2014 to 2015, you have 11 ensembles. In 2017, they have 45 ensembles. So these kind of ensembles are also changing. And also, you may have to forecast like this, like if you have mainly like the himcast data of tomorrow, mainly like yesterday. So today you are forecasting, like yesterday you forecasted today, also second day, third day. So 72 hours forecast, 24 hours, 48 and 72. So definitely even if you forecast it for next day, it is not going to be near real time. That's what, sorry, like I mean it is not going to be real time. So that even if you use AIML you can use, so there is no problem. But, or any other thing, like for example, if I want to capture that which one is the nearest. So 2 points are there, polytope, and you are comparing them. So you can use simple basically Euclidean distance and see, or AIML also you can use. So AIML you can use here also. But main problem is this, unless and until we have the one unified forecast, like instead of having ensemble of forecast. But people say ensemble of forecast is always good. If you do super ensembling, multimodal ensemble, so it is always better instead of using a single model. So that's why we can't say in real time forecast. Even if you use this term real time, this will be technically incorrect. So that's why we use near real time. And for the first question which you asked, I don't have any problem. Even I can run the model and whatever simulation you want. For example, with MMRD I had some discussion. So Mr. Mahadev Narkar, so he told me that just run and tell me, like what is the output. So he asked me that if you change the cross section from Cube Hotel to Mahim Creek, if you make it, like rectangular, if you make it trapezoidal, if you change the lining material, thousands of combinations. I ran and I told that this is the optimal. So this kind of run we can do. Only one problem which I must say, I do not have actual drainage data. Drainage data. Okay, so DM I have, drainage data is synthetically generated. And I myself did some survey, etc. because of with GPS. So that's why if I get near, very good, basically GIS-based drainage data, probably for Mumbai River we can run it and more accurate result will be expected.
So I think the main takeaway from this panel is the gap between data rich and data poor. I'll give the floor to you, Mr. Punde, and then I'll ask a question, but we should probably wrap up in a minute.
I'm coming from a position of arguing that we need to build resilience. I think what we are heading for or constantly working on is a confrontation with the natural system. Okay? Bear me for saying that. That we're constantly finding solutions which will constantly engineer and control nature. Right? I'm asking you a question for all those who make models. Have we ever tried to understand through any models what would be the optimal land space that we would need if we were to build a resilient landscape that would allow the water to be held back? Right? So, very interesting you're here, and I want to ask this question one more time. Okay. So the question is here, and so what I was basically making an argument was that in constantly finding engineering solutions, are we in a mode of confrontation constantly with nature, in the sense that we are constantly trying to find solutions where we can fix things within the natural system? The question that I am asking, and as designers we kind of tend to question everything all the time, is there a way that we can look at the city that the topography alone kind of begins to allow you a certain resilience? And the thing is that monsoon is 4 months in a year. Number one, it's extremely important for our being in existence. But secondly, it's also that very space then becomes usable as an alternative space at different times. Our cost of developing exclusive spaces is huge. And I think we don't realize this, that maybe by 2050, if we have a model in place to tell us what are the spaces that we really need to build that can give us this resilient form, we don't need to spend money on walls, because I know, and this is what I heard, that the walls that we have built are only for 5-year floodplains, right? So every 5th year or every 6th year, we will have a flooding issue continuing. And so as Gandhi said, that if you're on the wrong path, speed doesn't matter. So I think I'm just asking a very fundamental, elementary question, whether the city's open space structure needs to be really thought of. And as I said in my conversation, instruments of TDR, instruments of RG, for example, when we say make reserved greens, we can, and in the municipal bylaw, you can actually make RG as a norm of contiguity and generate an open space system. We can do it. These are all design thinking solutions. So I think to me that becomes extremely important. Or even TDR for that matter.
No, if I can interrupt, and I'm sorry I'm interrupting, and I wanted to be a part of the conversation and listen to what is going on since it's so interesting. The other thing there is going on about road safety design and design thinking again. And exactly what you said is what Vilusuji and I have been discussing for the last probably a year or more, in terms of we need to bring in climate engineering. Now it's time enough to do that, because engineering solutions and climate engineering solutions is one thing, and going beyond that, some of the decisions that we've recently taken, especially with regards to, say, the Mithi River development and all, is, again, like you said, by creating walls around the river banks, it's going to create a bucket effect. And that is only viable, feasible, practical around where you have extreme civilizations, dense populations around the river. But places like RA, where you don't have people living around it, that's why we want to keep the floodplains open, let the river breathe, because finally it's going to keep growing. If we try to streamline a river, it's not going to happen, because that's against the force of nature. There's another thing that's coming into many riverfront development projects I've been seeing, is to create barrages, stop the water and create, water sports and aquatic activities. Now, by stopping the natural flow of the river, we're actually damaging ourselves. So this is something we've been thinking of and changing in our designs.
Also, I think it's very important to understand that this landscape is an estuarine landscape. The seawater comes in, the river water drains out, and I think one of the biggest problems that we will face, and I'm sure we're already facing, is the fact that the amount of, and we need to look at our urban regulations also very carefully, but I think these are the instruments we need to work with. If we don't let water percolate, one of the problems that we have is our bore wells have enough water, but the water is brackish and non-potable. And that's because that there is not enough freshwater ingress. Yeah. Right? And so I think we need to think of all of these things together collectively.
Supplement what the Honorable Minister has said, like the morning presentation we have shown, most of the land is reclaimed. So if you want to go back to a estuarine type of ecosystem, like the Singapore presentation they have shown, there are lots of space available where the greening can be done, the natural breathing can be made available. That kind of luxury we don't have now. But it is possible to get it, provided we do a financial modeling also. So the rivers, some land along that, we have to develop it on a different development method. You give more TDR there, take back the slum and other people backwards, and that real estate is going to be very premium, because obviously it will be river facing, and it is not so close to the river. So you will get a very good view, and there are many cities in the world which has created that kind of premium, exploiting the real estate, where the local people are also accommodated, and the financing of those projects are possible by cross-financing. So it is not only those people. If you go vertically, then more number of people can be accommodated. There will be some sellable component, and that thing will finance the whole river beautification project. So this type of financial modeling is possible. Many cities, they have done it. In fact, it is time, and it is a win-win situation, because the rivers will have a breathing space. You can push them back. You can go back slightly to the earlier systems, and those local people can also be accommodated very effectively. So these financial modelings are available. We have to explore more in detail.
Precisely what I'm saying, but I have a slightly different take on the financial model, because the financial model is a regular trap, in my opinion. I think there is something called state responsibility, and that has to happen. I mean, I'm being very, this thing, that I think it has to happen. For example, you look at what has happened to healthcare in this country, right? It's because of the hospital, the financial viability, and all of that. And I think there is a problem. And being a poor country, the responsibility on the state is much larger. I'm sorry, but I'm just...
Yeah, of course, the state will obviously play a role of a facilitator. That's what I told in my presentation also. Unlike the Western countries where the private sector pitches in a big way. So the state has the responsibility of enabling. But you can't expect the state to always own up all the problems. It is not always the state has to resolve all the problems. It is a primary job of the state to give an enabling environment. And the private sector is ready to pitch in, provided there is a very good enabling environment. So the ultimate purpose is you need the riverine systems to have more space, more breathability. The natural ecosystem need to be developed. What is preventing you from getting that? Because all those places are highly encroached. So, for example, this Poisar River, now the Mitti River redevelopment plan. When we go into practicals, we know we are not able to progress much because the people, there are more than 3,000 hutments, eligible hutments. You need to send them somewhere. So how to do that? It's a very detailed process. Now, if we have an enabling environment where the private sector is ready to pitch in, they can construct houses, and the whole area can be declared as a planning authority, like Mitti River Planning Authority, like you have Dharavi Planning Authority. You can have Mitti River Planning Authority, you specify the boundaries, and it is basically rearranging the spaces. So if you go this China, all these transit-oriented development, what is TOD? You give highest floor space to the 1 square kilometer within the metro station. That is how they walk to the houses. So here also those units can be adapted. You can push back, go slightly vertically. What is now the Dharavi, if you see, it is all flat, either single story or 2 stories. Now there will be a lot of social sciences also involved. There is social aspects to it, of course. Yeah, so now how the dynamics is there, how they are glued to that. There are many things, right? Ultimately, we have to merge all these inputs and to find a practical solution. I think by continuous dialogue and creating an enabling environment, it is possible to find a solution. Yeah.
Correct. I agree.
And that is just that I think what you're saying makes sense. It makes sense only if there is a clarity about values.
Right.
I think what we are doing in Mumbai is we are trying to find solutions to all problems through the regime of CDR and FSI. And that creates a fuzziness.
Right.
And it creates then more problems than it solves issues. For example, have we solved the issue of informal settlements by creating more houses by SRA? We haven't. Okay? Have we been able to talk about Dharavi redevelopment, for example? It's been offering since 2005 when it was first declared. We are in 2022 just now, and a lot of things have changed on the ground. Right? So I want to just say that if environmental regulations of this kind and the financial model is going to revolve around that, we will need to declutter and de-emphasize other modes for which these same regulations are being deployed. Otherwise, this tool of FSI, TDR, it is becoming very, very blunt tool. No, it becomes like, I don't know,
एक ते शस्त्र असतं ना की जे कुठच्याही दिशेने जाऊ शकतं, बरोबर. तर आपण त्या दिशेला चाललोय अँड दॅट विल बी अ पॉइंट ऑफ नो रिटर्न. Our reliance on these instruments then is because the state certainly has to lead the way. Facilitator means not that I have introduced an instrument and now I will stay back and look क्या हो रहा है.
Like you yourself said, it is like a knife. It is the problem, not the problem of the knife, how you use it. So yeah, so you have to consider all these inputs and effectively, I think we can find solutions to that.
I think I'm not trying to say that it's all states' responsibility. The first thing I said when I spoke was that it is collective responsibility, and which is one of the reasons I didn't thank anybody for this organization, because I think it's our collective responsibility. But to just quickly add one last point to what you said, I think we have not experimented enough in design thinking. That's the key. And I think the trust in design has to be re-established. My practice grew in Delhi. I am a product of design competitions, right? So I think these ideas need space, and the experiment through design is extremely important. Thank you.
Can I just say a few words? What comes out from today's discussion is that there is no dearth of data. And I think in this room, we can solve the world's environmental problems because we have that type of caliber of people. Unfortunately, we don't speak to each other. And that is the dirt of the problem. That once we start talking to each other and bring everything on the same table, then lots can be achieved. So when you talk about SRA, you talk about mobility and transport and things like that, it all has to come down to one central point. And I like the minister's suggestion in the inaugural that what we are suffering from is a central point of decision making, which takes care of everybody's views and then comes down with an action plan with a timeline. And that is where we get lost. So I think the suggestion that the minister came out with as an institutional framework on a basis of that, so that would help in achieving many of the problems. Lastly, I don't think we are in such a grave situation. We have one thing still up our sleeve, and that's the eastern waterfront. So that's a huge stretch of land that is just lying idle and can be utilized for the benefit of our city, our environment, and all the other issues that we are talking about, SRA and things like that. I think if we, as I have a central thought process, we can redesign, remodel to a certain extent and solve most of our problems utilizing that part of the thing. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Manushi Jain from Sponge Collaborator, and this is a very interesting session, a lot of learning, and I think I completely agree with the gentleman ahead of me in terms of how much data is available, and like design practices like us can really benefit from all of this being shared and being open sourced. One of the points I'd like to add regarding the financial modeling aspect was to also consider the economic value of the ecology and environment into the financial modeling, because it's like we're still talking about TDR and FSI and the built environment, but the open space framework and the economic potential that it brings in to our urban environments, that's very critical to also integrate. So I think like the value of the tree, the value of drinking water, the value of having a park near 5-minute distance from your house, those are things that we cannot quantify, but we should, because that has a huge impact on the way we live in this city. Yeah, thank you.
Just for your point regarding, see the way we were building simulation models, I talked about it like we want to use it in planning and governance. This also answers the question that you had raised earlier, whether the current flood models and everything, does it use any of these nature-based ones? See, that is the core concept behind why we are developing it. Right now, everything that the data that we have is just data. And the tools that we have are produced to say, just to say like, 2 hours it will flood, 3 hours it will flood. It's not going into the planning process. So for us to do the planning, we need to cover every aspect of it. In my presentation, I tried to put it, but from gray infrastructure to green and blue infrastructure, we need to give a value to it and understand what is the value of each solution. and then we can adopt the solution. Virtually, we can adopt the solution before experimenting or before we just put a grey infrastructure just because it's saying. So we want to, these models are tools. It's not a solution, right? So when it's not a solution, it depends on the person who is going to use it, and it is going to depend on the data that we are going to feed into it. It is not just the physical data that we are talking about, but also on the socio-economic factors, etc. Actually, that is one challenge that we have been discussing a lot about on socio-economic factors. With respect to the society, as well as during the climate action plan itself, we had tried to put some numbers behind trees and water and everything. And we want to integrate that into our model so that it becomes more effective.
Just to add to that, I would like to raise a point where right now with the flooding aspect, most of the decisions or solutions that we are thinking of, if it is a engineering solution that we are looking at, it most of the time comes up with you design for a specific tipping point, let's say, for a specific duration, for a specific scenario, and then there's a big amount of money that goes as a lock-in period. And because of the maintenance that goes into place, there's a sort of a depreciating value to it. When we start thinking of a hybrid solutions, we are also thinking of the spatial quality that that solution would come up with, the co-benefits that that solution would come up with, which might have that appreciating value also over the time, and the kind of money that goes in the operations might be reduced, or even the upfront amount that is going into place in getting that infrastructure in place might be relatively lesser. This actually draws the lines from Netherlands' example itself of the room for the river, where the entire board sat together and decided the engineering solution of building a dike is one option. It comes up with a specific cost-benefit analysis. But if we think of letting the area flood, it comes with another cost-benefit analysis. And for long term, which is giving you more benefits from all the different parameters, like how Manushi also talked about the open space, the livelihood, the built environment that is there. So, yeah.
And to add to this whole debate between nature-based solutions and grey infrastructure, I'm an environmental engineer. I never stopped thinking about water resilience. And we saw in Roxy's presentation how we have dry areas and at the same time we have extreme events. So is there a balance that we can achieve there? In the city, in our city itself, we have flooding, plus we have tankers coming in. Can we use these sort of solutions to kind of have a circular water cycle there, where you can actually have very decentralized solutions for stormwater control and making that local community water resilient?
Right, I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that we need to have a city restructuring plan for 2050. Completely. There is no way. We cannot carry on building this city the way we build it. Simple.
And I have this question for you. What does Mumbai in 2050 look like according to you?
I might get poetic, huh? I want to sing Pyar Hua, Ikrar Hua again and enjoy the rain. Because I think it's very important in this aspect. I mean, in Marathi literature, the monsoon and the rain is such an integral part of our poetry. We have lost it all. I mean, think of it. The moment one hears a little bit of heavy rain, the mother calls up the daughter and says, "Come back home." It's correct. Yeah, but I think this is all because the way we've built our city. There is no doubt in my head.
I think when you talk about hybrid solutions, yeah, that is a way to go ahead. It can't be purely engineering solutions, but at the same time, I'm not a pessimist, but I would say we can't too much romanticize about the how it could be possibly consultative process and many other things. You know, actually we have to be very practical. You see, what works in other countries may not work for us. Like Singapore, climate-wise, it might be the same country, same place like Mumbai. But the kind of space, the kind of free land available, it is amenable for all those experiments, which you can't definitely do in Mumbai. You have more teething problems here, more social problems, you have more slums. So I think in Mumbai, we'll do all the consultative process, every inputs are welcome. But the solution will be predominantly, it is not only engineering, predominantly it is going to be engineering solutions. But at the same time, Now it is only engineering solutions, so we have to move to predominantly engineering solutions. Along the way, you have to do the consultative process, how to make it more cost effective. Like the river for room for river Netherlands, that's a totally different setup, because there the options are completely available to them to whether to relocate to other places. So that we can't directly compare our Mumbai method. Mumbai, the density is so huge, and the livelihoods, like Madam mentioned, the livelihoods issues are at stake. So how do you find a solution to the flooding problem also, as well as the livelihood issue also? There is lots at stake. So it has to be consultative process, but at the end of the day, I feel as a projects department guy, I would say mainly it will be engineering solutions. Mainly, whether you like it or not, it will be some financial modeling which will fund it. Of course, at the end of the day, money has to come from somewhere. Yeah.
Just a second, in terms of extending on the Singapore model, what I also want to understand as someone who's wanting to learn more about cities and built environment, is Singapore typically has done in the past what we sort of ask it to do for environment, be it reclamation. Reclamation has happened on a large scale. Concretization has happened on a large scale. Even now. And yet, with an everyday heavy monsoon, how do they keep away from floods? I think that is something which we need to think about in terms of, what is the environmental impact of that. He's being pessimistic. No, pessimistic, not pessimistic.
जनता मंडळाचे जे नागरिक आहेत त्यांनी जे वॉटर सेन्सिटिव्ह व्हायला हवं या प्रक्रिये आमची जबाबदारी आहे पूर्ण पाणी पोहोचवायची. प्रश्न आहे की नागरिकांनी पण त्याला सजग होणं ही एक बाब जी आहे.
बरोबर आहे. आणि एकच जे आपण सांगितलं की लोकसहभाग आणि लोकांमध्ये अवेअरनेस हे खूप महत्त्वाचं आहे. म्हणजे मी पण मध्यंतरी असेंब्लीमध्ये सगळ्या आमदारांसाठी IPCC रिपोर्टचं पण प्रेझेंटेशन केलेलं. साधारणपणे 70 एक आमदार आले. आमचा प्रयत्न होता की सर्व पक्ष जर आमदार आले तर थोडं कृषीसाठी असेल, ट्रान्सपोर्टसाठी एक थोडं अट्रॅक्शन आपल्या ह्याच्यात असतं की आम्हाला शहरामध्ये जोडून जायचं की आमचं शहर आता महानगरपालिका नफा ते महानगरपालिका वगैरे जाहीर करायचं. तर हे सगळं होत असताना जसं मी आता मगाशीच बोलत होतो की कोल्हापूर असेल, नाशिक आहे, नागपूर आहे, या काही शहरांमध्ये आता मला भीती एवढीच वाटायला लागली की नागरीकरण शहरीकरण वाढत असताना आपण अनरेग्युलेटेड डेव्हलपमेंटमध्ये गेलो तर ओव्हरहेड वायर्स, ते वायर्सचे गठ्ठे, गटार वगैरे ते सगळे भयानक प्रकार होऊ शकतील. तर ते एक आहे. आणि दुसरं म्हणजे जे मला आपल्याकडून परत एकदा थोडं ह्या प्रोसेसमधून समजून घ्यायचं, जसं आता आम्ही जेव्हा एन्व्हायरमेंटच्या परवानग्या देतो किंवा आपण बिल्डिंग क्लिअरन्सेस देतो तेव्हा STPs बिल्डिंगमधलं लोकलाइज, ग्रे वॉटर डिस्चार्ज होणार नाही वगैरे ह्या सगळ्या गोष्टी आहेत. पण जे आता होल्डिंग टँक्सचे आम्ही सुरू केलेत, मिलन सबवेला असेल किंवा ह्याला असेल आपलं सेंट झेवियर्सला असेल, तसं इतर काही सोसायटीजमध्ये करणं गरजेचं आहे का? जसं मी कलानगरचा मगाशी उल्लेख केला, आमच्या मागे छोट्याशा मैदानामध्ये छोटा आम्ही खड्डा खोदतो आणि त्याच्यात पाणी ते भरून ठेवतो, पण ते फॉर्मलाइज करायला पाहिजे का? इतर ज्या सोसायटीज आहेत, मोठ्या हाऊसिंग सोसायटीज आहेत, जेव्हा आपण STPचं देतो त्यांना, परत वेस्ट सेग्रिगेशनचं देतो, मग रेन वॉटर होल्डिंग पॉइंट आता आपल्याला प्रत्येक रिडेव्हलपमेंटमध्ये कंपल्सरी करायला लागेल का? हा पण एक मला वाटतं विचार करणं गरजेचं. हां, मग त्या पाण्याचा पुढे काय करायचं ते एक आपण पुढे विचार करू शकतो, पण हे काही सोल्युशन्स ह्याच्यावर आपल्याला मला वाटतं काही ठाम मतं मांडायला लागतील.
Just to build on the Singapore and local water resilience, so Singapore आधी पूर्ण ग्रे होतं, it was all grey, but then over the past few decades they started thinking about, one, they have imported water from Malaysia, two, climate change is happening, and three, their rainfall is similar to ours, 2500 mm. So they started converting slowly their concrete channels to actual buffer zones, actual natural water courses, जिकडे storm water recharge होतो. So their dependency on water from Malaysia has almost reduced completely.
ते रिन्यू वॉटर वगैरे आपण प्रेझेंट केलं.
And they have adapted guidelines from Australia. आपण म्हणतो ग्लोबल नॉर्थचं आपण अडॅप्ट नाही करू शकत, but they managed to do it. They have adapted these guidelines which actually help them engineer these nature-based solutions, and they have formed, मी आता मॅप दाखवला सकाळी की त्यांच्या स्टॉर्म वॉटर ड्रेनेजलाच ते एक सोल्युशन कनेक्टेड.
So the only thing is 2500 mm a year, you're saying, right? But it is normally divided over every single day's orographic rainfall that they have. For us, it is 2500 in 72 days. So the
amount of hybridization is something we could take up on.
Also, to add to that, a very interesting thing is that in Singapore,
you've shifted from here to here. We were noticing you here also.
So they used to have, let's say, a parks department or open gardens department, like even how we have in FCG. And they also had a public works department. Over the time, they realized that both the departments have to work together. So eventually, they converted PWD into a landscape department itself, which is overlooking not only the public works but also the open spaces, which is, I think, what the conversation was also heading in a way.
But if you look at Singapore, if you see the housing, that Singapore housing is not like ours. The housing is highly vertical and it is restricted to some spaces. And rest of all the area, even though the Singapore and Mumbai geographical area might be almost the same, the population is hardly 60 lakhs. And the whole, most of the population is packed, highly packed in some locations where all the residences are vertical, right? If you own a bungalow or villa in Singapore, you are a billionaire. It is not the case here. Okay, so there are differences. The geography is different. So whatever photos you show in Singapore, adapted from Australia and other places, they are done in the open area where the land is available. Now coming to Bombay, all I am saying is, if you want to solve the problem of Dharavi, Sayan, that area, the Mitti River, that area, then you can't say land is freely available in RA because there are different catchments. So we can't say take a very holistic approach. Bombay mein jaha hai. Bombay mein jaha hai, of course. But if you really want to solve the problem, it has to be catchment wise, simple. So there are more than 131 catchments. So if you really, what are the broad areas where the flooding is affected us severely? If you look at 2005 or recent years, it is a central Bombay, some portions of southern Bombay, some places. But mainly it is a central where the Sayan, Harbour Line, Sayan and other places connecting all the Mitti rivers. This is a highly affected area. But if you want to solve the problem there, you have to find the solution there. You can't say RM mein jaha hai, eastern mein jaha hai, that is.
नाही एक्झॅक्टली नाही मी जे मगाशी म्हणालो ना की वेनवेअर आता कसं झालं मुंबईत सेस नॉन सेस बिल्डिंग जुन्या बिल्डिंग्स म्हाडाच्या आपले जे लेआउट्स आहेत नाही एक्झॅक्टली नाही इव्हन SRAचे जे आता रिडेव्हलपमेंट होतील CRZ नंतर होतील तर हे जे लेआउट्स बनतील ह्याच्यात आपण सोल्युशन्स काय एनग्रेन केले पाहिजेत त्याच्यावर आपण थोडं एक
हा मला वाटतं खूप महत्वाचं आहे की TBR किंवा FSR ह्याला besides the economic value, if the state can give the economic value and connect it to an environmental value, that I think is
सो ते आहे आणि
तर त्या जागा राहतील एन्व्हायरमेंटसाठी.
नाही दुसरं काय झालं ना जसं हे सांगत होते की आता पोयसर नदीचं पण आता पोयसर नदी जेव्हा आपण रुंदीकरण करतो खोलीकरण करतो लोक स्थलांतरित होतात. आता त्या दिवशी माझ्याकडे एक मोठं रेलिगेशन आलं की त्यांना तिथून दूर न जायचंय, तर कोणी आपापल्या जागेतून बाहेर हलायला तयार नाही. म्हणून आपल्याला तिथे व्हर्टिकल डेव्हलपमेंट, आता ती डेव्हलपमेंट मुंबईत वरतून बघितलं तर जेवढं स्लम एरिया आहे तो जेव्हा आपण रिडेव्हलप करू, आता होपफुली त्याला गती मिळालेली आहे कारण आपण ॲम्नेस्टी पॉलिसी वगैरे ह्या सगळ्या गोष्टी आणल्यात. ते होत असताना धारावीचं पण मी परवाच रेल्वे मंत्र्यांशी बोलत होतो की रेल्वे लँडचं काय करायचं, ऑलमोस्ट 45 एकर्स आहे. हे होत असताना ते छोटी शहरं निर्माण करू शकतो का 15 मिनिट सिटीसारखं तिकडच्या तिकडे, ते एक गोष्ट. दुसरं म्हणजे त्याला सोल्युशन्स क्लायमेट बेस्ड काय देऊ शकतो, जसं रेन वॉटर होल्डिंग पॉन्ड्स असतील, स्वतःचे काही लोकलाइज ट्रीटमेंट प्लांट्स असतील, मटेरियल रिकव्हरी फॅसिलिटीज असतील, ह्या काही गोष्टी मला वाटतं तिथे जर आपण केल्या तर हे होऊ शकेल.
Cannot remain as parks and green spots because they can be played around. That's number one. Number two, and because of the point that you made about Singapore having 2,500 acre range spread over the year, where we have this very short time window in which it happens, the landscape then can become the golden sand for the natural park. And that space then is also available in non-monsoon periods for people for other activities.
That's exactly what we're doing.
Yeah, so that dynamism is, I mean, we need to accept this dynamism. I think one of the fundamental problems is that we're forgetting the dimension of time in all of this.
Quick comment. I mean, there are two things. I mean, in the conversation, just to summarize, I will say that MC is coming from a point of view of a lot of these, solutions that will work on ground right now, and the current scenario that Mumbai is facing. Of course, there is a problem with housing, there is density, and everything that comes into play, and the lack of open spaces of everything of that sort. And the points that you have been making are really long term, and it is the way that we have to go. Now, I would suggest that we have to build a transition plan from the short-term goals to the long-term goals. How do we do that? And that is one. Second is with respect to this platform. I see that this platform is a solution, right? In the sense like you have so many different voices, and you need to do this at a regular interval, and you have to find out a method that, in the way that the comments that are recorded over here can go into all the target plans that we are preparing, every strategic plan, every master plan that we are having, and that mentality for those plans have to come from these stakeholder meetings, and this platform has to be made a little bit more permanent rather than a single event.
What the intention is?
Sir,
Sorry.
I think we are running short of time. Yeah, last point. Yes. I think everybody is okay. I think we should break for the lunch because I guess.
Thank you very much. This has been actually an amazing discussion that we were not expecting. I think the reason we also conceived this entire workshop, sir, was exactly
see this complicated nature of the problem of flooding, right? That it is so interconnected with the issue of housing in our city. And we are really hoping that maybe in the next 2 days we can engage with a lot of organizations that have been working on issues of housing, issues of access to services, understand also from their side, and then come up with a much more holistic sort of framework for ourselves.
That is true. And what we could also do is, because the common consensus is this has to go on. This is a process in terms of consultation and action, because what we hear also should be implemented from our end, be it BMC, MMRDA. Maybe the next time we also call MMRDA and other agencies to understand the perspectives. But if we can take key takeaways from today and tomorrow's consultations and presentations, and then see what can be actioned in short term and long term and medium term, and then have a review again, say around July, maybe once in 2 months or once in 3 months, where we can at least, judge ourselves of where we stand. So we do that. Thank you. Thank you.
So let's close for lunch. I'm standing between you and lunch, but here is a notebook on where you can put in a wish list for your data needs, especially our panel today from morning, and if we can have kind of map if these can be met and why not. That would be an interesting exercise. So it's right here.
And it's open to others as well. So it's not only the panelists, but yeah, please.